I remember the sound before the silence. It was sharp, metallic, a screeching cry of steel against stone, and then nothing. Darkness folded around me like an old coat. I tried to move, but the world had vanished beneath me. When I opened my eyes, light stabbed into my skull. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and burning wood. For a moment, I thought I had awakened in the aftermath of a dream. But the pain, the throbbing ache behind my eyes, reminded me I was still alive. I was lying in the middle of a road that cut through an endless stretch of forest. A wagon, broken in half, smoldered a few feet away. The horses gone, the driver gone, and me. I didn't even know my name. I touched my face, half expecting to recognize it. Nothing. My fingers trembled as I searched for meaning in the emptiness inside my head. Who was I? Where was I going? The questions came like waves, but there were no answers, only the rhythmic hum of crickets and the distant whisper of a stream. I tried to stand. My legs gave out. The world tilted and spun. Blood trickled down my temple, warm and sticky. I reached out, grabbing a branch for support, and began limping toward the sound of water. The forest stretched endlessly, thick trees, old and knowing, their shadows long and watchful. I stumbled upon the stream, cupped my hands, and drank until my reflection stared back at me through the rippling water. A stranger. That's what I was. The man in the water had scars on his jaw, a streak of ash across his cheek, and eyes that carried the weight of battles fought long ago. There was strength there and sorrow, but no recognition. I searched my pockets and found a small metallic badge, half bent, engraved with an emblem, two crossed swords beneath a falcon. I traced it with my thumb, hoping it would whisper something back to me, a name, a memory, anything. But the silence remained loyal. Then came the voices. Faint at first, laughter, chatter, the clinking of pots. I followed them, dragging my weary body through the underbrush until the forest opened into a small village. Huts made of clay and straw sat quietly under the dying sun. Smoke rose from fires, carrying the aroma of roasted grain. A child saw me first. She gasped, then ran. Moments later, a group of villagers appeared, cautious, curious. "Who are you?" one of them asked, a tall man with a beard like woven roots. I opened my mouth to answer, but no sound came. The truth was simple, terrifying, and absurd. I don't know," I finally said. Their eyes softened. The man stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Then perhaps," he said gently, "you'll remember in time. For now, you need rest." They took me in, fed me, tended to my wounds. They called me Aaron, a name given by the village healer, an elderly woman with eyes like twilight. "It means reborn," she said. Days turned into weeks. My strength returned, but my past did not. Every night I dreamed flashes of battlefields, burning skis, and the cry of men shouting my name. But when I woke, it was gone. Still, the people of Varan, that was the village's name, treated me as one of their own. I worked in the fields, repaired fences, and learned the rhythm of simple living. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, as if life itself was trying to lull me into forgetting what I once was. But deep inside, something restless stirred, something that refused to sleep. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I stood at the edge of the forest and whispered to the wind, "Who am I?" And somewhere far beyond the trees, thunder answered. They called this place Varan, and for a long time its name felt like an anchor thrown into the fog that lived inside me. Varan was small, a braid of clay huts, and tilled earth tucked between a sleeping forest and a plain that yawned toward the mountains. The people moved with the patient, unhurried rhythms of those who measure life in seasons and harvests, not in the thin, clipped moments of orders and marches. When I first opened my eyes to that life, everything in me protested. Habits I did not remember rose like shadows, a certain stiffness in the way I walked, a way my hands looked for a rifle's weight and found only a hoe, the way my jaw tightened at the sound of splintering wood. The villagers watched me work and wash and break bread with them, forgiving the oddness in my silence. They did not ask the questions I could not answer. They only offered food and shelter, and the kind of small talk that patches a wound with friendship. The healer called Mela taught me names for things I had forgotten. Not names from my life before, but names that mattered here. The proper way to test soil with a broken reed, how to stitch a torn palm with a needle of thinned bone, which herbs would stop a fever and which would make it worse. She moved with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with titles or regimented commands. It was the steadiness of someone who had seen seasons of sorrow and knew how to move through them without breaking. "You learn fast," she said one afternoon, watching me braid a reed basket. Her voice was soft, as if speaking too loudly might wake something unwanted. "I have to," I answered. The words surprised me, they came heavy, felt like a stone that landed in an empty well and sent circles outward. I did not know why I had to. I only knew I wanted to be useful. To be useful meant I was not a shameful, blank thing rolling at the edges of other people's lives. Days stacked themselves into a pattern. I rose before the sun, gathered water, helped mend a weathered roof, sometimes walked to the river with the village children and taught them how to skim stones. They laughed at my clumsy attempts to show them tricks, and the sound of their laughter loosened something in me like thawing ice. Laughter in Varan was not the brittle, brief thing I sometimes remembered from distant dreams of barracks and formal halls. It was wide and warm, a thing that could feed a room. I found work in the fields, beneath a sky that kept none of the geometry of maps or battle plans. The land taught me humility. It taught me that the body has a memory apart from the mind. While my past refused to return, my hands remembered. They learned the grip and the angle, the pressure to press seed into the soil so it would not wash away with the rains. When the villagers spoke of harvests and pests and the dance of seasons, I listened and learned how to let the earth speak its simple truths. It was a kind of obedience that did not come with the sharp edges of orders. It was, I realized, healing. Yet even as my days found rhythm, the nights kept their sharp teeth. When the moon rose thin and silver, I would lie awake and hear echoes that were not mine, clashing metal, hurried commands, the metallic taste of adrenaline. Dreams arrived like fragments of an old map, pieces I could not fit together. Once, in the middle of sleep, I woke and found my palms aching with phantom burns from a roll I could not explain. A child's hand would find mine, and in that touch there would be a question, "Who are you?" And my silence would be a lie. People of Varan learned to read me without words. Men would hand me tools and nod, and we would work side by side. Women would watch at the well and offer a slice of bread. Even children, who are mercilessly honest, accepted me with a curiosity that did not judge me by the past I could not remember. There was a boy named Tavi, small, fierce, with a scar on his brow that made him look older than he was. Tavi decided early on that I was his teacher in all matters of bravery and strength. He would follow me into the woods and watch how I moved, mirroring the tilt of my head, the way I scanned a clearing as if expecting danger. "Will you teach me how to fight?" he asked once, hopeful and fierce. "I will teach you how to stand," I said. It felt safer. Standing did not require weapons and did not press the hot iron of my forgotten life against my throat. But strength, as Varan learned, comes in many forms. You don't always see the measure of it until it is needed. Months passed. I became, if not fully one of them, then a shadow of their kind. A man who could sow and reap, who could mend a roof and carry a sick child. The scar on my jaw faded in importance in the eyes of my neighbors. Scars are common in a place where weather and work carve people over time. I began to sleep better, though never entirely without flashes that made my throat tight with unfamiliar grief. And yet there were moments when my hands betrayed me. Once, while helping to chase a rustler fox from the granary, a man from a neighboring hamlet arrived with news vague, edged in fear. Bandits had been seen on the far road. The villagers gathered in strings of whispers that braided alarm into action. Varan had seen bands before, men hunting, men hungry. But the word bandit carried with it a new fear, a sense of cruelty that did not care for reason. That night the village slept uneasily. Torches guttered in their stands. Dogs watched the boundaries with low, impatient growls. I sat by Mela's door and felt the old something like the anxiety before a storm wake in my chest. The villagers asked each other questions, knit brows, tried to find plans. They looked toward the fields and then at the horizon as if the earth itself might open and reveal the danger. For reasons I could not place, I volunteered to walk the eastern border at dawn. Some nodded, others were surprised but not suspicious. It was something small to do, and doing small things helped stitch me in place. When you live with people, you are permitted, sometimes invited, to act as they act. My legs took me along overgrown trails, and I watched for footprints, for snapped twig, for shadows that did not belong. The morning had the smell of crushed grass and unfinished sleep. I found tracks, human recent, wide set as if the wearers bore weight and bad intent. They were not many, but they were fresh. My heart did not drum the way it had in the wild slivers of memory. Instead, something more precise unfolded. Steps in a pattern, a cautious probing of the path. I followed the prints until the trees opened into a small clearing. There on the ground lay a strip of cloth, caught on a root, crimson threaded through with something that might be blood. I remember later the sensation of calm that rose, precise and cold, like a blade easing from a sheath. Some animals carry a reflex that switches on at the sight of certain threats. I had it too. It was not memory so much as muscle remembering what the mind had forgotten. I knelt and examined the cloth as if that action would unlock an old door. My hands moved with an economy of motion I could not explain. The pattern of my observation was almost ritual. Examine, assess, move. There was no panic, only a quiet that felt purposeful. When I walked back to the village with the evidence, faces turned. Eyes met me with the rawness of people who live close to each other. Their gaze was a mirror for the fear I might not have known I carried. We rallied, men with sharpened spears, women with poles, old farmers with heavy hammers. There was no pretension here. Everyone who could stand took up something to defend their homes. That night we kept watch in shifts. The stars spoke in their indifferent way, and we listened for the shift in the air that heralded movement. The hours were long and thin, but each hour wove a deeper thread into me. I did not sleep. Instead, I walked the perimeter, palms itching with a readiness that felt ancient and precise. And then they came, shadows like uprooted trees, men moving with the confidence of wolves. They fell upon the outer huts first, quick, brutal, hands grabbing, flames licked at straw, cries like broken glass. The village erupted into motion. Spears were raised. Women beat pots with their wooden spoons in a clang that served as both signal and weapon. Children were hid in cellars and under straw bundles. The bandits were fewer than we expected but brutal, their faces masked by scarves, their movements practiced. I do not recall thinking in terms of orders that night. Thought was not a luxury anyone had. Instead, there was the pure mechanical flow of action: move, dodge, strike. My hands found a dropped spear like a thing I had known my whole life. There was a kind of fusion between me and that spear. I felt its balance and weight as if the two of us had agreed silently to speak the same language. I moved like a tide, pulling and pushing, meeting each attack with a counter. My body did things I had not practiced here in Varen: angling, deflecting, wrapping my arm across an incoming blade like an old friend, offering a familiar greeting. People later would speak of my fighting that night with amazement and a hint of fear. Some said I fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal. Others swore I moved like a man with memories pouring through him. I remember little of the specifics, only the pattern. The bandits were taken aback by the sudden organization among the villagers. Where they had expected easy prey, they found a people willing to stand. The clash was noisy and filthy. We lost some, and so did they. We had the advantage of home. The bandits, unused to coordination and thinking the village weak, had miscalculated. At one point, I found myself face to face with a man whose eyes were like little coals, bright and angry. He lunged at me with a short knife. I sidestepped and used the momentum to flip him into a low stomp that left him stunned. He looked up at me with a mix of surprise and recognition, not of me, but of the fact that this village would not give itself up so easily. He spat something in a language I did not know and fled with his companions into the dark. When the dust settled, we stood among the smoldering remains of the outer huts and counted the cost. There were wounds, people crying, and the bitter taste of loss. Yet we had kept Varen. The bandits had not taken what mattered most. The villagers gathered around the fires and tended to the injured with a care that made me feel untethered in the best way needed, folded into a fabric that depended on me as much as I depended on it. That night later, when the village had quieted to low murmurs and the moon was a pale coin in the sky, Mela found me sitting on the ridge where the smoke rose slow and blue. She did not ask for explanations. She sat beside me, and for a long time we watched embers pop and sigh into ash. "You carry more than the village sees," she said finally. Her voice was calm, measured. I looked at my hands, at the smudges of soot still dark on my skin. "I remember the feeling of it," I answered, "not the reasons." Mela nodded like someone who understood that truth too well. "Memory returns in its own seasons," she said. "Sometimes with the rains, sometimes with a wound. You must let it." I wanted to ask her if memory, when it came, would be gentle, if it would stitch me back into the person I might have been, or rip me apart with truths I could not carry. But words felt unnecessary then. Instead, I let the silence sit between us, full of the night and the living. By dawn, the village had cleaned and rebuilt what could be rebuilt with what little we had. The bandits were a rumor moving across the plains. Their threat lingered like a shadow, but not an immediate one. People went about their days because in Varen, living is not optional. The work would not stop for grief. And something else shifted in me. The night had not only awakened the reflexes of a body trained a way I could not name, it had also given me a new clarity. There were fragments that would not be banished by the steady kindness of Varen, the tilt of a commander's shoulder, the cadence of movement when men form a line, the small protocols that shelter and survival demand. They were like flares in a fog, brief, bright, and then gone. I did not know what to do with the knowledge that I could fight. I did not know if I wanted it to mean I was the thing people whispered about in the night. A soldier, a commander, a man with a past that might not belong here. I only knew I could no longer pretend the past would never touch me. So I taught Tavi to stand and to watch and to care for the village in everyday ways. I showed the men how to strengthen palisades and set simple alarms. Nothing grand, nothing that would roar in newspapers or win medals. Just small, steady things that might one day keep a child from waking to the sound of boots. In the quiet that followed, I walked the fields and thought of the road that had brought me here. I picked up the half-bent badge from my pocket, the one with the crossed swords and the falcon, and traced its edge. It was a relic of something else, a key I could not yet turn. I wondered if it would open my old life or if it would only remind me of how far I had come. Varen had given me a name, Aaron, and given me a place to belong. Yet inside me, the seeds of a storm were growing roots. I did not know if, when they unfolded, they would return me to a life of orders and campaigns, or if they would simply make me a stranger twice over, first to my own blood, then to the people of Varen. For now the sun rose and the village stirred, and the children ran with the uninhibited joy that makes the heart bend. I walked among them, feeling my feet on the earth, and I kept the badge warm in my palm. The past was patient. Its arrival, whenever it chose, would be its own timing. But if it came with danger, I would not be a man without a place. I had learned to stand. The morning after the attack, the village moved like a body healing from a wound. There was pain, but there was also purpose. Smoke still curled above the blackened huts, yet laughter, fragile, uncertain, returned to the air like a shy bird testing its wings. I found myself at the center of it all. People I barely knew clasped my hands with gratitude. Mothers brought me bread. Children stared at me as though I had stepped out of one of their bedtime stories. the kind told around fires when the night felt too long. They called me the stranger who fought like 10 men. But I wasn't proud. If anything, I was frightened by how natural it had felt. The rhythm of combat, the precision, the calmness that came over me as chaos erupted. That kind of control wasn't born of instinct. It was forged, drilled into bone and blood by years of discipline. And that meant only one thing. I had been trained. I had been a soldier. But for whom? And why could I not remember their faces? In the days that followed, I repaired fences, helped rebuild roofs, and smiled when people thanked me. But inside, something gnawed at me, a pulse of questions that refused to quiet down. Each night I lay awake, staring at the wooden ceiling above me, the faint orange glow of the dying hearth dancing across the walls. And in those hours the dreams came. They came like storms, sudden and merciless. I saw flashes. Men in formation under a crimson banner. The pounding of drums. A voice deep and commanding, shouting orders through the roar of cannon fire. My hands gripping a blade. The world shaking with the chaos of war. Then a scream, sharp, personal, cutting through the din. A woman's voice. I always woke at that part. Cold sweat, racing heart, the echo of that scream lingering in my chest long after the dream ended. One evening, Mela, the old healer, found me outside the hut, sitting by the dying fire. She had a way of appearing when I least expected her, as if she could sense when my thoughts became too heavy to carry alone. "You've been quiet," she said softly, her wrinkled hands holding a bowl of steaming tea. "I'm always quiet," I murmured. She smiled faintly. "No, this is a different kind of quiet, the kind that builds walls." I didn't answer. She sat beside me, her joints cracking gently as she lowered herself onto the bench. "Your hands," she said, pointing to the calluses on my palms. "They're not the hands of a farmer." I glanced down. The truth of it was undeniable. The calluses were old, deep in places that no hoe or plow would have shaped. The marks of sword and rope and recoil. "I saw how you moved that night," she continued. "You didn't hesitate, you didn't think, you just knew what to do." I swallowed. "And what does that make me, Mela?" "Someone who's lived through things the rest of us only fear," she said. "Someone who's forgotten them for a reason." Her words lingered long after she left. Weeks turned into months. The fields healed, so did the people. But for me, healing felt like a mask. Beneath the peace, something restless clawed at the edges of my mind. Then, one afternoon, as I was teaching Tavi how to hold a wooden staff, a rider appeared at the edge of the village. His horse was coated in dust, his cloak torn, his face pale with exhaustion. He barely had the strength to dismount. "Bandits," he gasped. "They've taken Rollo's, the next village north. They're coming this way." Panic spread quickly. The same fear that had filled Varen weeks before returned, sharper now, because this time we knew what these men were capable of. I gathered the able-bodied men and tried to calm them. "We'll prepare," I said. "They won't take us by surprise." "How can you be so sure?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. "Because I know how they think," I wanted to say. "Because I've fought men like them, maybe even led men like them." But I couldn't bring myself to speak it aloud. Instead, I laid out a plan. We reinforced the barricades, set traps along the main road, posted lookouts on the ridges. I taught them how to move silently in the dark, how to work in pairs, how to make torches into weapons if it came to that. They listened and obeyed, not because they trusted me, but because something in my voice carried the weight of command. Night fell heavy and slow. The moon hid behind clouds, as if unwilling to witness what was coming. And then, faint at first, the sound of hooves. The same fear that had once frozen me now sharpened me. I felt every heartbeat, every breath, every vibration in the earth. The bandits came in waves, rough, armed with crude blades and fire, but we were ready. The traps snapped, the spears found their marks, the villagers fought with desperation and I with precision. Every motion was memory. Every strike, every block, every shout, echoes of a man I used to be. But this time, it wasn't for a flag or a general. It was for people, for a village that had given me a name and a place when I had neither. The fight lasted until dawn. When the last of them fled into the woods, we stood among the ruins of our defenses, bruised, bloodied, but alive. The people cheered. They called me Aaron the Protector. But as the sun rose over the wreckage, I knelt beside a fallen bandit and froze. Around his neck hung a pendant, the same falcon and sword's insignia, engraved on my broken badge. My breath caught. I turned the pendant over, and on its back, faint but legible, was an inscription. Regiment of the Iron Falcon, Commander Aaron Valen. My heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt, and in that moment everything around me, the forest, the village, the faces, blurred. A wave of memory crashed over me. Fire, smoke, screams. Men shouting, Commander Valen. And then betrayal. A hand, a dagger, a fall. That was my accident. That was the night I lost everything. I staggered to my feet, clutching the pendant, my mind spinning between two worlds, the man I had been and the one I had become. Mela appeared beside me, her expression unreadable. "You remember," she said quietly. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I was their leader, the Iron Falcon, a commander. "And now?" she asked. I looked toward the rising sun, the light breaking through the smoke. "Now," I whispered, "I have to decide what kind of man I'll be next." For days after the battle, I could barely breathe. It wasn't the wounds, those healed quickly, but the weight of what I had discovered. Commander Aaron Valen. The name sounded like thunder in my skull, shaking loose every piece of my new life that I thought was secure. I had come to Varen a nameless man. And now, the past I had begged the silence to keep buried had clawed its way back into the light. The memories came not as whispers, but as floods. They struck when I least expected them, flashes of faces, orders shouted across burning fields, the smell of gunpowder and rain. I remembered the Iron Falcon Regiment, men forged for war, loyal beyond reason. I remembered leading them through impossible battles, how they chanted my name before the charge, how we bled for a kingdom that believed itself immortal. And I remembered how it ended. It was not a fall from grace. It was a betrayal. A midnight meeting in the capital, a dimly lit chamber where I confronted my superior, General Corvan. He had sold out the regiment, sold out the men I had led. He took gold from the enemy, traded our lives for territory. I stood before him, demanding justice. He smiled and ordered my death. I remember the ambush. My carriage attacked on the forest road. My soldiers cut down by the very men who once called me commander. The dagger in my side, the crash, the flames. And then nothing. Until Varen. I sat at the edge of the forest that night, the pendant clutched in my palm, the engraved falcon glinting faintly in the moonlight. My mind was a storm, my heart an arena. If I had truly been that man, if I had truly commanded armies, then the blood of hundreds was on my hands. And yet here, in this quiet village, I had found something purer. A peace untainted by pride or conquest. A family I hadn't earned, but had been given nonetheless. Still, ghosts do not rest easily. That same night, a rider appeared from the northern road. His horse was bleeding, his cloak soaked from rain. He dismounted and staggered toward me. "Commander Valen," he whispered. The sound of my old name pierced me. I turned slowly, and my heart almost stopped. He was one of mine, a soldier. Older, thinner, but unmistakably familiar. His eyes carried both exhaustion and reverence. "By the gods, it is you," he said, falling to his knees. "We thought you were dead." His name was Sarek, my second in command. He told me everything. After my supposed death, General Corvin declared the Iron Falcons traitors. The regiment was scattered, hunted. Those who survived became outlaws, hiding in the wilds. But when word spread that bandits were raiding villages near the southern border, Sarek had followed their trail, hopping somehow to find me. He had found me, but not the man he once served. "Corvin still rules," Sarek said bitterly. "He's turned the Falcons into mercenaries. They burn for whoever pays most. The raid on Varen, it was his doing." My blood ran cold. "So the men who attacked us, they wore our insignia," he said, "but they're not soldiers anymore. They're thieves wearing your legacy." I stared at the forest beyond him, where the shadows seemed deeper now, darker. A part of me, the commander that still lived in my bones, wanted vengeance. To hunt Corvin, to reclaim what was stolen. But another part, the man Varen had shaped, whispered something quieter. "Let it go. Stay. Protect what you have." For days I wrestled with it. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The village sensed the storm in me but didn't ask questions. Even Mela said nothing. She only watched me with those twilight eyes that seemed to see beyond skin and silence. Finally, one evening, I stood before her. "I have to go," I said. She didn't look surprised. "I knew you would." "I owe them justice," I said, "and I owe myself the truth." "And what of this place?" she asked quietly. "What of the people who call you their protector?" I swallowed. "I'll return." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then go as Aaron of Varen, not as the commander of the Iron Falcons. One leads with authority, the other leads with purpose." Her words rooted deep. Before dawn I left. Tavi woke and ran after me, clutching a wooden staff I had carved for him. "Will you come back?" he asked, tears glinting in his eyes. "I promise," I said, resting a hand on his head. "And until I do, you're the guardian of Varen." He nodded solemnly, gripping the staff as if it were a sword. Then I rode north with Sarek, toward the capital, toward Corvin, toward the ghosts that had stolen my name. The road was long and haunted. Villages lay in ruins, banners torn. The once proud falcon insignia marked walls like a curse. Everywhere we went, I saw traces of what I had built, now twisted, corrupted. On the third night, as we camped near the ruins of an old fortress, I stared into the fire and asked Sarek, "Why follow me still, after everything?" He smiled faintly. "Because, Commander, even broken, you're the only one who ever led us toward something worth dying for." His faith burned brighter than the flames. By the time we reached the capital's outskirts, the storm within me had quieted into resolve. I no longer feared my past. It was a part of me, but not the sum of me. I was Aaron Valen, once a commander, now a protector. And I would confront the man who had destroyed my life. The gates of the fortress loomed high, black against the sky. Guards patrolled the walls, their armor bearing the symbol of the falcon, my symbol, but hollow now, stripped of honor. I drew a deep breath and whispered to the wind, "For Varen, for the falcons who fell, for the man I used to be." Then I stepped into the shadows, ready to face the truth. The capital had changed. The streets that once gleamed with pride now reeked of corruption. Market stalls stood half empty, guards demanded bribes from merchants, and the people spoke in whispers, fearful, watchful. The heart of the kingdom, I once swore to defend, had rotted from within. I rode through the lower quarter in a cloak of dust and shadow, Sarek close behind me. Neither of us dared speak. Every corner carried eyes, and I felt the weight of my old insignia burned into the back of my mind. The Iron Falcons had once been the kingdom's shield. Now they were its curse. We found shelter in a tavern called the Broken Lance. Its sign creaked in the wind, fitting, I thought, for what we were. Inside, soldiers in dark leather armor drank loudly, their laughter sharp and cruel. Their insignia gleamed under torchlight, the falcon, claws dripping red. Sarek's jaw tightened. They wear it like dogs wearing crowns. Let them, I said quietly. By dawn, they'll remember what it truly means. We took a table in the corner. I watched them, how they boasted, how they treated the serving girl with contempt. These weren't soldiers. They were scavengers feeding on the carcass of honor. Then I heard the name Corvin. The room seemed to shrink. A man at the bar leaned close to another. The general's throwing a feast tomorrow night, he slurred, celebrating 10 years as commander of the Falcons. A laugh followed. 10 years of blood and gold, you mean? Another voice joined in. A toast to Corvan, the man who turned soldiers into kings. My hand clenched around the cup until it cracked. Sarek placed a hand on my wrist. Not here, he murmured. I stood, leaving a few coins on the table. No, not here. I turned toward the door, my cloak brushing against the floor. Tomorrow night. That night we made camp by the river. The city lights shimmered faintly through the fog. Sarek sat sharpening his blade, his expression unreadable. You could still walk away, he said. So could you. He smiled faintly. I've already walked too far with you to stop now. I looked up at the stars, so familiar, so distant. For a brief moment I remembered the nights in Varen, the soft laughter of the villagers, Tavi's voice, Mela's steady calm. What will they think when I don't return soon? I pushed the thought away. This wasn't just revenge, it was a reckoning. The next evening, the fortress blazed with light. Trumpets echoed through the square as nobles and officers entered through the iron gates. I had once walked those halls as a hero. Now, I would return as a ghost. We slipped in through the servant tunnels Sarek remembered, narrow, damp, reeking of age. The walls hummed with music from above, the laughter of men drunk on stolen power. As we crept closer to the grand hall, I could hear him. Corvin. His voice carried the same cold command it always had. Smooth, arrogant, sure of his throne. 10 years ago, he said, we rose from the ashes of betrayal. 10 years ago, a traitor commander fell, and the Falcons were reborn under my hand. The hall erupted in applause. I stepped from the shadows. The noise died instantly. Is that what you call rebirth? I asked, my voice cutting through the air like steel. Because from where I stand it looks like decay. Gasps, movement. Corvin turned, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes. Aaron, he whispered, impossible. You should know, I said, stepping closer. You buried me yourself. The guards drew their swords. Sarek moved beside me, his blade flashing in the torchlight. Stand down, I barked. The command in my voice was instinct, sharp, absolute, and to my surprise some obeyed. Corvin recovered quickly. You think you can return from the dead and undo what I've built, he sneered. No, I said softly. I came to remind you what you destroyed. He laughed, but there was no strength in it. You were naive, Aaron. You believed in loyalty, honor, ideals, but men don't fight for ideals, they fight for power. Then you've forgotten what it means to be a soldier, I said. He drew his sword. No, Commander, I learned what it means to survive. Steel clashed. He struck first, fast, practiced, desperate. I parried, the weight of every year between us collapsing into that single moment. The hall fell silent except for the ring of metal and the echo of our past. You killed my men, I snarled. They were collateral. They were loyal. He lunged. I sidestepped, driving my elbow into his chest. He stumbled back, crashing against the banquet table. Wine spilled like blood across the marble. You could have saved them, I shouted. And what would that have changed? He spat. The kingdom wanted war, I gave them one. I raised my blade, fury trembling through me, but something stopped me. A voice in my mind. Mela's voice. Go as Aaron of Varan, not as the commander. One leads with authority, the other with purpose. I froze. The fire in me dimmed into something sharper, clarity. Corvin saw it and lunged again. This time I stepped aside, caught his wrist, and slammed his blade into the stone floor. The steel shattered. I pressed my sword against his throat. He looked up at me, not with defiance but with terror. Do it, he hissed. Finish it. I stared down at him, the man who had stolen my honor, my men, my life. And then I lowered my blade. No, I said. That's the difference between you and me. You destroy what you can't control. I protect what I can still save. I turned to the hall, to the soldiers, the nobles, the traitors who had watched in silence. The falcons once stood for loyalty, I said, for unity. If you still carry that symbol on your armor, then wear it with meaning again or tear it off. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then one soldier stepped forward. He dropped his weapon. Then another. Then a third. Soon the hall was filled with the sound of steel hitting stone. When I left the capital that night, I didn't look back. Corvin would live not as a general, but as a ghost of his own making. The falcons would rebuild, not as mercenaries but as protectors. And I would return home. As the dawn broke over the horizon, Varan's fields came into view. Children ran along the path, and the scent of bread drifted from the village square. Tavi was the first to spot me. He dropped the staff and sprinted toward me, shouting, "He's back, he's back." Mela stood by the well, her eyes glistening as I approached. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "I told you I would," I replied. She smiled, calm, knowing, "So, Commander, no more." I shook my head, "Just Aaron of Varan." The wind rustled through the trees. For the first time in years, it carried peace. Seasons passed. Varan thrived once more, laughter returned to the fields, and the echo of war faded into distant memory. The people no longer whispered my name as the lost commander. They spoke it with warmth as one of their own. The fields I once tilled for survival now grew golden with harvest. Children ran freely through the meadows, and every evening music drifted from the square, soft, unhurried, full of life. Yet even in peace, shadows lingered. Some nights I still saw the faces of my fallen men, the ones who never returned. I'd sit by the fire, eyes closed, and whisper their names to the wind. Mela would join me, her hand resting gently over mine. "They're at peace now," she'd say, "and so are you." One morning the king's messenger arrived, a letter sealed with the royal crest. I broke it open and read. To Aaron of Varan. The kingdom honors your courage and integrity. Return if you wish. The command is yours once more. I smiled faintly, then folded the letter and handed it to Mela. Tell them, I said, that the commander is gone, but Aaron remains. She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the village gathered for the spring festival. Fires burned bright, and the air was filled with song. I stood among my people, my family, and for the first time in years, my heart was quiet. Peace wasn't found in the kingdom or in battle. It was here, in the laughter of a child, in the warmth of a shared meal, in the hand of the woman beside me. As the night deepened, Mela leaned toward me and whispered, "You finally found home." I looked at her, smiled, and replied, "No home found me." The stars above shimmered like silver promises, and the wind carried only one sound, the gentle rhythm of life beginning again. The end.